We're now going to look at some issues surrounding animal welfare and animal rights. So, animal welfare deals with the humane treatment of animals. I don't think anybody would question that. Certainly no scientist would. Animal rights takes it to the next level of trying to extend the same rights to non-human organisms as those that some, certainly not all, sadly, humans have, depending on what country you happen to live in, I suppose. But I think you can see what I mean, where it's a level higher than just humane treatment. It's now granting certain inalienable rights, so to speak, to non-human organisms. And, there are a bunch of organizations. I think the two famous ones, though, are PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and ALF, the Animal Liberation Front. My own opinion there is that ALF is more extreme, more radical than PETA, though PETA has certainly done some rather bizarre things, illegal things in the past. They both have. Anyway, what people have to realize is that animal research, whether it be neuroscience or just behavior, is extremely, extremely regulated. You have to have proper credentials. You have to either have an MD degree or a PhD degree or something equivalent to those in order to engage in animal research, or at least be under the direction of somebody who does have these credentials. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of students doing animal behavior research that don't have those kinds of degrees, but they're supervised by people who do have those degrees. And then, there's all kinds of regulating agencies. You have to be, the researcher has to be affiliated with a regulated agency. It just can't be somebody off the street who happens to have a PhD in something who can start working with animals. You have to be associated with a biomedical lab or a university. And then there's all the regulations that you have to follow at many, many levels. The workplace itself. So wherever you work is going to have their own set of rules in place. Professional societies that you belong to, for me, that would be the Animal Behavior Society. For a neuroscientist, it would be the Society for Neuroscience. And right on down the line to other organizations, the American Psychological Association, for example. There are government agencies that are extremely regulatory in terms of animal behavior and biomedical research. And then even the journals, so if you submit a paper to a journal, suppose you've passed all these other levels and you've got your research done and it turns out to be an awesome project with really important findings, you write it up and you send it off to a journal. Well, journals also have their own regulations, and if the editor suspects that there's any issues having to do with how the animals were treated, that would be a basis right there for rejecting the paper or at least investigating further. And of course, plain common sense. Nobody who's working with an animal wants to be mistreating their animal. I mean, this whole thing about animal welfare. You don't want to be studying some abnormal animal because you've mistreated it in some way. So, that just common sense would dictate that. So, are there adequate alternatives? You know what? In some cases, I think there are. It really depends on why the animal is being used and who is using it. For example, in high school, people dissect frogs. I think now, though, if a student actually objects to doing that, they can have some alternative assignment. But people have been trying to come up with alternatives for that because high school students, while learning biology, are not necessarily curing cancer. So, yeah, I think that's one arena where there are adequate alternatives. So let's look at some of these.
For high school biology students everywhere, this revealing amphibian may be a cut above regular frogs. A team of scientists at Hiroshima University in Japan have succeeded in breeding see-through frogs. Frogs are frequently used for scientific research, but such projects have received increased criticism from animal protection groups. Researchers bred the sheer creature, a type of Japanese brown frog, for two recessive genes that make it pale. This allows researchers to see its organs, blood vessels, and eggs without having to dissect the animal. Some fish species are clear, but these frogs are hailed as the first transparent, four-legged animal.
So that's a pretty neat idea. You can still see some of the organs without doing any damage to the frog. And of course, there's all kinds of apps that are available. Here's one called Frog Dissection, Virtual Frog Dissection rather. And it actually looks kind of interesting and very educational. Here is sort of a trailer for this app. And there's no sound on the trailer, so I'll just talk from time to time here. But you can see there's all these different things you can explore. So you can actually do a virtual dissection. So make an incision and then peel away layers of skin and see organs, well, drawings of organs. And they can be rotated in 3D, as you just saw, so that's kind of cool. And of course, apps typically get upgraded all the time, so I'm sure that some of the things that we're seeing here will continue to improve graphically, at least. Looking at frogs versus humans, what we can learn about us by looking at the internal organs of frogs. And then various lab procedures for people that might go on and have some kind of a career. There's quizzes along the way so you can test yourself to see what you're learning. 3D internal organs to explore. So you click on an organ and then you can rotate it around and learn something about what that organ does. There's some videos built right in this case, having to do with frogs' habitats. And slow motion jumping, it lets you actually see the musculature of frogs. So if you've just dissected virtually some muscles, now you can actually see how they work. So that, I think that's fine for high school or even below high school level. The Japanese continue to get really clever, though, with these breeding programs that they're doing. So if the transparent frog wasn't enough, they've now done it with a mouse. So now we actually have a mammal that is often used as a model for humans. And they basically were able, genetically, to remove the color from the skin and render the skin transparent. Yeah, it does look kind of creepy. There it is. It was published actually in a scientific journal in November of 2014. And we're looking at an intact mouse from the bottom. And, I don't know if they've managed to breed a hairless mouse. But, if you can, not hairless, furless mouse. But if you remove the fur, at least the skin is transparent. And it might very well be the case that the fur is also bred out. I just haven't looked at this that carefully. But again, it's as creepy as it is. It's an alternative to actually cutting a mouse open to learn more about its anatomy if you are, say, a pre-med student and just starting out in pre-med at least. What about pets? So, these robotic creatures, again, from Japan, have been around for a while. Look at the price, $10,000. Oh my gosh, dogs are cheaper than that. But I don't know if I'd want something like this for a pet. Here's a cheaper version I'm about to show you that does all kinds of things.
A fusion of technology and personality. Techno, the robotic puppy, programmed to react to motion, voice, and human touch. Control Techno with a smart device. Launch sequence activated. Hit the sonic boom for a big reaction. Techno is engineered with state-of-the-art technology. Designed with artificial intelligence, computing data, and sensory awareness. Like a real pup, Techno flips out when he plays with his ball. Techno, the robotic puppy, can be used with a smart device.
Well, maybe if you're 5 or 6 years old, that might be something to play with. I'm not sure that it's as interesting as a regular pet. I mean, my dog certainly has something to say about Techno. Which translates roughly as get that thing out of my face. Oh, what else? Surgery training. This is something that somebody proposed for actual medical schools. where instead of actually dissecting something, you just have a model like this. I don't know about you, but if a surgeon was going to do something to me that's invasive, which is what surgeons do, I would like to at least have some assurance that that surgeon actually worked on a real animal and not just something like this before cutting me open. Nonetheless, that's the kind of thing that some of these folks are proposing. What else? Some other things to consider here. Yeah, if you are belong to an animal rights group, okay, PETA or ALF, and you are really true to your views, no exceptions, then you got to think about certain things that could affect you. Will you take medicine if you're ill? Because the medicine was tested on animals. Surgery, again, what I just mentioned. If your surgeon was trained only on videos or a mechanical model, would you want that person cutting you open? Should there be zoos? We're holding animals captive. What about entertainment? Now that industry has come a long way because with computer graphics, you can do things that make an animal look like a real animal, even though it's not a real animal. So I think that's an area where there has been some improvement, significant improvement. But now, what about service dogs? They're being held captive in people's homes. They're slaves, if you want to think of it that way. Is that right? Should we do away with all kind of service dogs? And just basic research, basic research would probably come to a grinding halt if we eliminated biomedical work on non-human organisms, which has all kinds of ramifications, as we'll see in a moment. But I did talk to a person that is rather high up in PETA about some of these issues. We actually did a podcast together. I invited her to do a podcast, and she did. Actually, it was for my animal behavior course, maybe about 7 years ago or thereabouts. Anyway, her feeling, when I asked her the medicine question, her view was it's okay to take medicine because what's done is done. We just don't want any more drugs tested on animals. Well, you can say that, but then I just don't buy that argument. That's my own personal view. I'm just giving you my opinion. So here are some advances that have been made in biomedical research, things that I think have helped a lot of people. So we're going all the way back to 1796. Obviously, this is not everything, but just a sample. You can see the species that were tested to develop these various things. Vaccines, anticoagulants, penicillin, open heart surgery and pacemakers that have saved many human lives. They were tested on dogs, and so on and so forth. This one ends in 2003 with MRI scans. So those are just a small sample of some of the advances where animals have been tested. Now, some of these animal rights groups, and again, it's really the radical ones, some by PETA, certainly, many by ALF, have engaged in a lot of illegal activities, really illegal activities. This is through 2006, from 1981 onward, and you can see an awful lot of illegal acts that increase as the years go along. And the types of things, most of these, the targets have been, in fact, biomedical research. You can see other areas here as well, some of which I think are justified. We really don't need to be killing animals for their fur. I would agree with that. Or testing eye makeup. That's the word I'm trying to think of. We don't need to be doing that to animals either. People shouldn't even have to be wearing that stuff in the first place, but whatever. And then the types of incidents, the number one being vandalism and then outright thefts, harassment of the researchers, arsons, and even bombings. And here we have some A year later, just some more data to show that it remains pretty high, not quite as high as 2006, but seems to be stabling out between 2003 and 2007 in terms of these illegal incidents. And then, of course, protests. So these are some, I think these were members of PETA that were protesting the National American Psychological Association conference one year, because obviously there are psychologists, I being one, that study animals. I don't cut them open, but I do study their behavior. And there are people that would object to that. If you go to the Foundation for Biomedical Research website, you'll see, and you can scroll on your own if you're interested. I'm just showing you some of the things that have been going on recently. You'll see the word Ebola pop up a fair amount here. And yes, they're very hopeful that monkeys can be used. We can't really use much else in terms of models for developing an Ebola vaccine. And as I record this podcast, this screencast rather, Ebola is very much in the news these days. So people really are trying to develop ways of finding a vaccine for that. But you can see many other things here where a lot has been learned from studying animals and is being learned right to this day. So this is current as of November 2014 as I'm recording this. And then again, the Foundation for Biomedical Research has put out some pamphlets and posters, just the way PETA does, to try to give the alternative point of view of the alternatives for biomedical research and the fact that, realistically, there is no alternative, as you can see in these posters. Some people think the best way to protect animal life is to make scientists fear for theirs, and that's the harassment, the bombings, the arsons, things like that. Again, I think it's mostly ALF has engaged in. Thanks to animal research, they'll be able to protest 23.5 years longer, kind of like this one. And then in Britain, they have the equivalent of the Biomedical Research Institute. For them, it's the British Association for Medical Research Charities. They suggest that, okay, if you don't believe that we should do animal research, then you should be made to carry around a card in your wallet that reads as follows: I, fill in your name, wish to see all animal research abolished and agree to live without treatments developed using animal research and testing. And then you open up the card. To honor my belief that animal research should be abolished, I hereby pledge that in the event of accident or emergency, I will refuse all medical treatments developed or tested on animals, including, but not limited to, blood transfusions, anesthetics, anticoagulants, antibiotics, sutures, open heart, and other types of surgery. If my child suffers from a genetic illness or other serious condition, I will not allow him/her to receive life-saving treatment developed through animal research. None of my pets shall receive any veterinary vaccine or medication that has been developed or tested on animals. So again, it's like what I was saying before. It's a matter of what you really believe in, how strong your beliefs are, whether you should do this or not. But, if you want to carry it to an extreme, this animal behavior course should probably not even exist.